From Brandeis University, welcome to Recall This Book, where we assemble scholars and writers from different disciplines to make sense of contemporary issues, problems, and events. I'm John Plotz, and my guest today is Alex Starr, brilliant editor at Farrar, Straus & Giroux, former editor of Lingua Franca, founding editor of the Boston Globe Ideas section, and editor of many remarkable prize-winning books, including George Packer's The Great Unwinding and James Forman's Locking Up Our Own. He's also a friend of mine of extremely long-standing. The name of this new series for Recall This Book is Books in Dark Times, and it explicitly takes its inspiration from Hannah Arendt's Men in Dark Times from 1968, which proposes, quote, that even in the darkest of times we have the right to expect some illumination, and that such illumination may well come less from theories and concepts than from the uncertain, flickering, and often weak light that some men and women in their lives and their works will kindle under almost all circumstances and shed over the time span that was given them on Earth. So at this dark moment, we really want to know what brings people like Alex and like you, dear listener, comfort or joy. Basically, I want to talk about your comfort food of books in a time like this, because my idea is that a lot of people now are going to be finding themselves actually able to sit down and, pull something off the shelf. And more than that, like wanting to pull something off the shelf. So
Right. No, good. So I'm a little constrained by sort of external factors. One of which is, we moved into this house, and we got our bookshelves built about a few days ago. They finally were built. I have 80 boxes of books in the basement, which I am only beginning to unpack.
Oh my God! So you basically have to do the kind of like it's like that fishing game you played as a kid where you just stick your hand in and you pull out a book.
Yeah. So sometimes it's quite a treasure, in the Jack in the Box, or I don't know, what am I trying to say? But sometimes it's not. So it's a little arbitrary what's come out so far, and I can't say I've deliberately selected something entirely new just because of my mood or circumstances or philosophical reflections on the present.
So Alex, in other words, you're dipping into books at random now, but is there a book that you are anchored in right now?
I wanted to mention two. So one, I think is the Jill Lepore, the These Truths. That's just been a book that's been sitting on my shelf for a long time. I would say just, once I got into it, it took me a little while, but once I got into it, sort of the skill with which she fills in broad outlines, but, does it with unexpected twists and terrific quotes and vignettes, and kind of strike certain balances in certain ways that I sort of find interesting. It's pretty absorbing. I was going to quote one line, just to give an example of where she can just do something so much with so little, is when she's talking about the Second Great Awakening, 20s, and the kind of Christianization of America. I mean, she'll have one great statistic that, church attendance really seemed to grow from about 1 in 10 to 8 in 10 in about 15 years, which seems hard to believe, but if true, like that dramatizes it pretty well. But this is Whitfield. He said this. He said, "I would go to jail with you, but I would not go to heaven without you."
I would go to jail with you, but I would not.
But I would not go to heaven without you. In other words, he really genuinely believed that every single person he was speaking to at a camp meeting should go to heaven and would go to heaven with him, and he would stake his own life and the possibility of his own redemption on bringing everyone with him, absolutely everyone who was there at the camp meeting. So when you just think of like the transition from this sort of Calvinist idea of limited atonement and only the saints go to heaven to a kind of more open-minded, you participate in your own salvation and you can make it happen through your own will, instead of just making some abstract comment about Arminianism, that quote, I would not go to heaven without you, which sounds like a huckstery ad man, slipping one by us, is nonetheless such incredibly brilliant rhetoric. And
are you saying that it's brilliant rhetoric, or you're saying that it actually marks a kind of ethos, a development of ethos, like a different way of conceiving?
Well, I think both. I think it's pretty hard to separate what was innovation in theology from an innovation in salesmanship, and
So it's actually funny that you would mention that would be the point you would mention, because I was going to say the thing that I've been really drawn into lately is Wolf Hall. And the reason
so we're really thinking about the Reformation here.
Yeah, exactly. I like it because of its Protestant theology, but it is all about hucksterism and salesmanship too, because it's the way that he, that is Thomas Cromwell, the central character in Wolf Hall, the way that he sort of saves souls isn't so much by preacherly manifestation of deep healing. It's by kind of bureaucratic legerdemain and like manipulation and
right,
insiderism, but always in pursuit of this vision of, you know, bringing whatever Wycliffeism or his vision of God. Or so yeah, like I think the thing that feels both fascinating and comforting about that book right now is that it's a book that draws me into something where I can really feel how deep the stakes are for the person involved.
Right.
Know? Like it's important. Like it's a book. Usually when I'm reading a novel on the side in my ordinary life, I'm looking for something that will allow me to come into it, not exactly speed through it, but just kind of enter it on my own terms and then leave again. But right now, what I really want is a different kind of book. I want a book that actually that has tentacles that really kind of holds me in.
Yeah. And what gives it tentacles?
So for me, it's the way that on the one hand, we see Cromwell being an operator. And on the other hand, we see him, you know, it begins with his relationship to his beloved patron, Wolsey, who he eventually loses.
Right.
And then it is also about his passionate intensity about like revenging Wolsey. And it's about his Protestantism, which can't really, or his, you know, non-conformist, non-Catholicism, which he can't really articulate openly, but it's like deeply there. And then he's also kind of just running a bunch of games all at once because he's like a master Machiavellian strategist. But what I like about it is that there's a level of master Machiavellianness going on at the surface, but then underneath you can feel the deep conviction and how it struggles.
Right.
So there's all these friends of his who we just hear that they're about to die or they're about to be burned, or, you know.
Remind me, I read it a long time ago, but there's also his family members who die in a...
They die. His wife dies of the plague in one day.
Yeah, that's right.
I thought the way goes
she
away and she comes home.
Yeah, I felt something that was just very powerful. The kind of
incredible.
You know, it's very poised, and you sort of feel his indirect emotion there. You know, really, it was extraordinary. That's what stuck in my head from the book actually the most. I think probably the wife dying.
Okay, well, so Alex, on a more general level, I do want to pursue this thought that you're actually able to take comfort, because my basic question is like, in this situation, what books give you comfort? What books give you joy? And are those two the same thing? Because I think for me, often I would say comfort and joy are the same. Like, you know, when I read Ursula Le Guin or something, like I find it deeply comforting and it gives me joy. But then other cases, like Brothers Karamazov, it's not comforting at all. There's nothing comforting about it. But it gives me a great amount of joy because I feel like it is thinking without banisters. Like it is just everywhere and it's continually eroding. Like you think you understand how a character is grounded and then you realize, oh, but everything you think is just because that's what the character likes to think about himself, but he's not actually grounded on that. He's grounded on something else. So he gives me joy without giving me comfort.
Right.
So my insight is that you can take comfort and joy from practically anything, which is great.
But here, I just want to take the term comfort a little bit because, you know, if we were not in the plague time, would you be, you know, it would be very tempting to use the word comfort as a pejorative, you know.
Totally.
Whereas now it seems like something we can appreciate. So,
but the only thing I would say about that is that I think the professional deformation of English professors is to take comfort as a pejorative. But as somebody who teaches like a science fiction class, a fantasy class, I've always been less inclined to take that as a pejorative, you know. And definitely less so at this time. But and I thought about that. You know, why am I trying to write a book about Ursula Le Guin? And I think the answer is, you know, it's just, I mean, I guess comfort bothers me less than it bothers a lot of people in my profession. I understand the aesthetic. I do not understand the aesthetic as necessarily proceeding from a sense of exposure to the abyssal, the confrontation with danger. Like I get that aesthetic objects are remarkable sometimes in being able to do that. I mean, like there's like Richard Serra sculptures that I approach and I'm thoroughly shocked and disoriented, and that's right. Like that's what they should do. But I just don't think that's the only test for.
Well, no, it can be pattern and harmony, and you know, what's Bach or something is a different idea there.
Yeah. Do you know this? Have you seen the Yo-Yo Ma Instagram? He re-recorded one of the Dvorak cello pieces. I'll send it to you. It's like Coming Home. It's based on an American spiritual, Coming Home. or Going Home.
Yeah, no, I know that. Yeah.
And, like, I mean, Willa Cather, who is, she's my heart. She writes about Dvorak a lot. And when she writes about Dvorak, what she talks about is this way that, the effect of that music is to send you into some sort of reverie space that, maybe it can't be very representationally grounded. And it's not necessarily conceptually revelatory. It's just like an emotional space,
Yeah.
I don't think that's so bad.
No.
Yeah.
Well, let me think about comfort in somewhat different terms, because there's an element of comfort and discomfort in reading Lepore, which I think has to do with for almost anyone now trying to just think, here's a book that's trying to tell the big story of American history, and how do we orient ourselves toward that story?
Right.
And so on one account, there's American history as a kind of providential design, working toward, maximum liberty and erosion of deference between classes. And, we're all going to be free and show the world how to be free. That's one story. There's another story that, America sort of maximizes what it means to plunder and exploit and
that's the Howard Zinn People's History of the United States.
Yeah, and Ta-Nehisi Coates being the more recent version of it with different emphases. And those are just two kind of meta narratives, if you will, that are out there that end up organizing a lot of historical discussion. And here's someone, Lepore, who's not really a partisan of either of those approaches, or trying to just fill them in, but really trying to kind of rebalance them in some ways using the most recent thinking in different fields. And so that's why this is interesting.
Please share this memory with me that when we were at Record Hospital together, when we did the college radio show, that Arthur Paul wrote on a record that, somebody, basically the only thing people ever said about records was this record sucks or this record rocks. And basically there was a Jill Lepore character who wrote on a record. It was probably Barnaby. It was like, it's pretty good. The guitar is kind of interesting. It didn't really. And Arthur wrote underneath, I don't understand. You mean it sucks and it rocks? So you're saying Jill Lepore is saying America sucks and rocks?
Yeah. And that's exactly
that should be on a bumper sticker. America, we suck and we rock.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's that modulation, for better or worse. I find comfort in that just because I'm trying to find my balance on those issues. And so I wouldn't necessarily do it exactly the way she does, but I think she is trying hard to kind of get that right. And thinking about that as you read doesn't always give me comfort, but it does help me think about what would give me comfort or something.
So here's the interesting thing. So one thing a lot of people say about comfort, and it's definitely true for me, is that it's available it's connected with escapism. Like, it is connected with the capacity to take and have you go somewhere else. Like Thomas Hardy has a whole sort of attack on fiction that's not this worldly. He says, the fiction that rural people want to read about the city, or city people want to read about the country. It's just like an invented other place. So it seems like you're saying your conception of comfort is very this worldly, right? Because you find Jill Lepore comforting because she helps you understand our real actual world, right?
Yeah, or orient myself in a way that neither seems to be too complacent nor too simplistically alienated. To choose my words carefully.
So that's really interesting, because when I think about somebody like Le Guin, or maybe Samuel Delany, but definitely Le Guin as an example, and even Willa Cather, what I like about them is that they bring me to a place where I just feel like I can get my bearings on my conception of the world generally, but by being away from this world. Like, in other words, you're saying Jill Lepore is great because she helps you get your bearings on this world, this America that we actually share. And what I'm saying is, what I like about Cather or Le Guin is that they give me a conception of a world which I recognize as possible, as conceivable, as livable in, but it doesn't feel like my world. It actually feels like some other world. And going there, kind of like listening to Dvorak, just kind of lets me do something else. Like it lets me be semi-detached, I guess I would have to say. Like it gives me a different, I still feel like it's the world, but I'm aware of it being kind of away from my own world. Do you know what I mean? Whereas what you're talking about is more like attunement or engagement.
Yeah, attunement, right. No, that's a good word. Yeah, I mean, obviously reading fiction can in various ways do more what you're talking about, but I think I probably resist science fiction partly because I'm not quite looking for what you're describing sometimes.
So wait, so that, I'm so glad that lets me ask you about this book that, I mean, Alex, you're a genius editor. Everybody should know how many great books you've edited. But as you know, the book of yours is that I'm obsessed with is the Peter Godfrey Smith book about octopuses.
Yeah.
Called Other Minds. It's called Other Minds, right?
It is.
It is, yeah. So what do you, when you think about that book, do you think about that book as a book of engagement or attunement, or do you think about it as a book of otherworldliness and escape?
Good question. It's definitely a book of exploration. So that somewhat splits the difference. It's attuned to something, but attuned to something you don't already know. It's, diving deeper into the water, diving deeper into history, and, trying to reframe just the sort of question of how, three-dimensional matter, kind of folds itself up into something that feels like consciousness. So it's doing all of those things at once, which is one of the things I love about it. But I would not say it is creating an entirely different world to live in. I think it is inviting us in a way that feels, rigorous rather than, just fanciful, to use a loaded word, about what it might be to sort of have the perceptual equipment of primitive, certain kinds of sea animals, have their perceptual equipment, have their tasks that they need to accomplish, have certain kind of bodies that allow you to move through the world a certain way, and put all those things together. And what might that feel like? And, the book's not directly trying to do that over and over or anything, but implicitly that is sort of a pretty exciting experience that borders on something more literary or imaginative.
Yeah, you could paraphrase that. You could paraphrase the intent of the book as what is it like to be an octopus? Basically.
Sure. Yeah.
But so okay, I want to pick up the word fanciful, which you knew I would balk at. Yeah. But so you're saying that its rigorousness makes it very this worldly because it's an experiment which is meant to be strictly rooted in the science. It's about the fact that the neural structures and the neural pathways of octopuses and maybe squid and other cephalopods are so different from ours, and yet they have a kind of consciousness which therefore is very different from ours, but we can kind of get at a sense of what that consciousness is. And so you're saying that's rigorous, which makes it like this worldly or something. And you're saying the opposite of that would be fanciful. But I guess what I'm saying, but to me, the rigor, its rigor, its success is that it does kick you sideways into really being able to think about distributed cognition, like the fact that octopuses basically do in some sense think with their tentacles because they have these nerve cells that are in their tentacles and are kind of wired together but not centralized. Like it actually allows me to, think of an other mind that works in a different way. So for me, the comfort of that book, and I do find that an intensely comforting book, is that there are beings, I almost said people, there are beings on our world who just perceive and make sense of our world in a really different way from what we do. And, there's just something mentally emancipating for me.
That's interesting, because some people would find it very discomforting, especially in an ethical sense, just because, if animals have such rich inner lives or whatnot, clearly we're killing them, and the oceans are killing them and everything else. And that, on
that level, I mean, on the political level, absolutely, in terms of what the consequences of our, the consequences of our blithely unintended consequences as a species, which have now become intended because we see the unintended consequences and then we just ignore them, which makes them consequences. But I totally agree with that. I think my response is a little bit different, which is it has to do with the sense that if we do successfully manage to kill ourselves off, which honestly we seem to do a pretty good job of, that there'll be a successor species around that has a different, could do something different with this world.
Yeah. Okay. No, I like that. I like that. And I assume you're also it sounds like, the possibility of these other consciousness also becomes attractive insofar as one senses the limits and flaws of our own cognitive setup and so forth.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. It does. All right. So wait, Alex, I'm gonna look at my bookshelf and yell some random names at you because I like Conrad. What does any Conrad give you? Great comfort or great joy?
I'll tell you what gave me great discomfort, but in a very intense way, was I read The Secret Agent when my children were very, very small. And geez, it's a very particular emotional memory of the part of the book where the sort of mentally defective young man who ultimately is blown up.
The brother, is that his name? Yeah.
I can't remember his name, but his body is blown to smithereens, and he's only identified by the name of where he lives and then his coat, right?
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
But there's something about this vulnerable boy and the way he's sort of mercilessly exploited, and the poignancy with which his sort of family and home, become identified. That just found completely devastating.
Yeah. He's the one who he sees the horse being beaten and he says he wants to take it to bed with him because that's his idea of comfort for anything in the world is to take it to bed.
Yeah. There's something about that tenderness in what's obviously not a particularly tender novel. Really had an impact on me. So
well, Conrad is like that. I think he's very I mean, he's so difficult, but he's not difficult because he doesn't know what it would be like to be happy. I mean, he can see happiness very clearly. It's just always through several panes of glass or something. Like there's always that possibility, because if it weren't there, it wouldn't be so painful when it was snatched away.
Yeah. I do find. I mean, I love reading him, but I do find him quite difficult. There's something about the thick ooziness of the prose that is wonderful when you kind of just ease yourself into it, but it doesn't tend to move me along the way other Victorian writers usually do.
Yeah. Well, he's modern, right? I mean, he's
right. Maybe there's all the levels.
I think that's why I like him. It's like Hardy, He's kind of he's broken out of the old, but he hasn't quite figured out what the new is.
Yeah. I read a lot of Hardy like a year or so ago. I can't remember if we talked about that much.
Oh, no.
It was a lot of fun. So I had this book group again, and I picked Return of the Natives, and I think that was the wrong book and was not the one I liked the most at all. It's actually so much weaker to me than the others I read, but I was really astounded by, first of all, how much fun Far from the Madding Crowd is.
Far from the Madding Crowd's unbelievable. And the Julie Christie movie is unbelievable.
It's so funny. I'm dying to see it. I was just hearing someone talk this morning in a video conference about, so the movie was directed by, John Schlesinger.
John Schlesinger, Midnight Cowboy.
In its time, it was the movie he made before Midnight Cowboy.
Yep.
And he almost didn't get to make Midnight Cowboy because it was such a huge bomb. So
I
thought that was pretty interesting.
It's a stunning movie. It really, like the scene where she goes running after him with the Valentine. Oh my God. Yeah.
Well, and the sword display, section, whatever scene must be pretty great.
Yeah.
And then I reread Mary
Day. What is his name? Sergeant Troy.
Yeah, Sergeant Troy.
And All Saints and All Souls Church. Oh my God.
Yeah. And then I reread Mary Casterbridge, which I had read before, and just found it extremely affecting, and just the sort of sense of the place. And there's this incredible passage about sort of two different bridges, and like one is where more affluent people go to commit suicide, one is where poor people do, and just like that kind of observation, which exactly as you were saying before is what Harder might have missed in certain kind of other kinds of fiction. Was just astounding. So I mean, the plot always gets a little creaky and takes too many turns toward the end, but in that book I found myself not minding it at all. I just found it really anchored in that character. And
can I just have to defend Return of the Native? I know you're right. I mean, Clem Yeobright is a painful character, but I do feel like it's building up towards Jude the Obscure, which is, it's an almost unreadably great book. So
I've been saving that, so I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's my next one.
I think it's amazing, but it is very easy to throw the book across the room. And I do think that's what makes naturalist books great, is that they are so discomforting, and
Mm-hmm.
and Jude the Obscure is fantastic because it begins in a place of great natural joy and beauty. Like it begins in that old rural England, but by chapter 3, I mean, spoiler alert, like you're already done with that. Like you can't return to that space. And that's the space that his other novels had sort of created. And then in Jude, it's not available anymore. Hey, have you read The Sellout?
Yes, that was great. I love
it's hilarious.
I absolutely loved it.
But kind of brilliant too, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
isn't just funny. It's actually, I think it has this driving anger to it that makes the humor amazing.
Yeah. No, I can't quite figure out how he pulled that off, but
I can't either.
It was
and he's so mild-mannered in person. Have you seen him speak? Like I pulled up a YouTube video. He's just like incredibly self-effacing. I mean, he's one of these people who like clearly saves all his energy for his work. And then the work, I just feel like it just leaps off the page. But
no, to sustain that kind of, almost stand-up voice for that long is just sort of spectacular. I can't think of another book quite like that.
Oh my God, Alex, thank you so much. This was great.
Yeah.
Recall This Book is the brainchild of John Plotz and Elizabeth Ferry, and the music comes from Barbara Cassidy and Eric Chaslow. It is edited by Claire Ogden, and production and publicity and website design is by Kaliska Ross. And if you enjoyed this or any of our other episodes, please do rate us or review us on Stitcher or iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. And if you enjoyed this, there's a lot more conversations about books where this came from. So please give us a visit at recallthisbook.org. So Alex, thank you very, very much. And thanks for listening.